Hi, friends. Susan Blackwell from the Spark File here to let you know that the doors are open for the Spark File Illume, a 9-month group creativity coaching mastermind that invites you to be the Chief Creative Officer and Chief Marketing Officer of your creativity. But what does that mean? That means in 9 months in Illume, you will clarify and advance your big creative goals and learn how to effectively share your work with the world. Now, if you're listening to this and you're an experienced creative or an accomplished professional who seeks a space where it is safe to attempt something you've never tried before, or complete a big creative project, or take your work to the next level and acquire the skills needed to share your creative work with the world, Illume might be right for you. We are calling in emotionally intelligent, high-functioning creatives who are ready to level up. You can find out more by going to thesparkfile.com/Illume, but do it now to find out if Illume is right for you and to save with early bird discounts. That's thesparkfile.com/Illume. Take a leap, take a risk. Go to thesparkfile.com/Illume and join us for Illume.
The Sparkfile podcast may contain profanity and other adult content.
Please use your discretion.
When I bump into something that inspires me, I dump it in my spark file. Could be something that I want to make or how I want to be. I pump it in my spark file. I jump into my spark file. Let's open up the spark file.
Welcome to the Spark File, your one-stop underground zine for creative inspiration.
I'm Laura Camion.
And I'm Susan Blackwell. If you're an OG listener, welcome back, Sparkler. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome. But you may be asking yourself, what exactly is a Spark File? Where do I get one? What do I file in it? These are good questions. You know, we've got answers.
A Spark File is a place where you consistently collect all your inspirations and fascinations.
Here's the deal. We are makers who make all kinds of things.
If you're like us and you're making stuff all the time or want to be making stuff all the time, you already know that the wellspring of inspiration can run a little dry.
So we're on the lookout for fresh ideas, images, and inspiration that spark our creativity and pique our curiosity. Things that inspire us to get up off of our asses and make things like this very podcast.
Or a reconstruction of broken pieces into something more beautiful than before.
I have an idea what that is, and I'm so excited. Or an act of resilience and defiance through creativity and self-expression.
Every episode, we're going to reach into our Spark files and exchange some sparks. And from time to time, we're going to talk to some folks who spark us too.
And if you're not careful, you might just choose to respond differently from here on out. So without further ado, let's open up the Spark File. Camion
Blackwell.
Camion, I'm so happy to hear your voice. And I'm so happy that I think this recording is working properly.
Oh my gosh.
We weren't so sure.
One.
It was a little touch and go for a second, but I think we're on track.
I think we are. It sounds like it. You sound great.
Thanks, Camion.
Yeah.
You sound great too, and right on time.
Right on time.
Camion, how are you?
I'm doing good. I'm hanging in. How about you?
I'm pretty good. It's been pretty busy.
Yes.
But I feel like all the stuff that we're doing and making it's a little bit drinking from the fire hose of glory, but I feel fortunate. I'm just a little tired.
Yeah. I was saying that to my therapist this week. I'm like, there are times when I'm so tired, I just want to burst into tears because I'm exhausted. And I do. I mean, let's be honest, I don't stop myself from doing that. But
we call that the broadcast news.
I do. I have my daily broadcast news moment where I burst into tears. But
listen, if you don't know that reference, do yourself a solid and go watch Broadcast News. I love that movie. If you like movies about white people, that is a good one.
Is it all white people though?
I think that movie. Name somebody who is a person of color in that movie. I love that movie. No, I
do
love
too.
that movie.
I do too.
But let's bring it back to Camion, who has at first it can sort of be like you walk in, you open a door to a room, and Camion's sitting there, and just hot tears streaming down your face. And at first, it can be like, oh no, what did you just get bad news? And then it's like, no, this is just how my little pressure valve releases.
I'm just letting it out. I'm just letting it out.
That's right. It's like an Instant Pot. If any of you been cooking with an Instant Pot lately, it's sort of like that moment when you natural release or the full on, just like you just kick that little dial to the side and a little pressure gets steamed off of there. It's all good.
And it's like a good thing, but it's so interesting. No one typically equates tears with a good thing, but I'll be like, no, I'm just letting it all flow.
I'm just letting it out of my face. I think it's great. And it's also so great. This is where I love collaborative shorthand, where I can just be like, oh my God, are you okay? And you can just be like, broadcast news. And I'm like, got it.
That's it. Broadcast news. That's it. Because in the movie, Holly Hunter's character, she actually schedules it every day. Like she doesn't she sits on the edge of her bed with a box of Kleenex and she's like, okay. And she cries and then she's like, I'm good. And she goes on about her business. So yeah.
Does she do a thing where she takes the phone off the hook? Like she like, or she unplugs the
stage. Yep.
So that she's not going to be disrupted and she can just get it up and out and then like pat her tears dry and then get to business.
It's literally like checking off the to-do list. Like this is something I need to do. I will be doing it sometime today.
Put that in your bullet journal. Yeah. Did I have my cry? Some people are like, I have to sweat through one shirt a day, or I have to make sure that I drink this many ounces of water, but you can add that. Make sure you have your daily broadcast news cry. Get it all out.
Yeah. Yeah. So all of that's been happening for sure. Feeling tired and enough to cry. But, I said to my therapist, in all honesty, like if I wasn't working really hard, I would be alone with these thoughts and probably obsessing, and going crazy in a different way. I just feel like someone was passing this thing around on Facebook recently that was like, we're not in the same boat. We're in the same storm, but we're not in the same boat. And this whole long thing about, as we've talked about before, like people are experiencing different challenges, but everyone is challenged. Yeah. But they're just not exactly the same.
I like that metaphor, the captain's log. That's really cool.
I discovered this about 3 days after we did that spark. I was like, redo. I want to redo because I need to incorporate.
You're getting it now. This is your let me try that again. You get it now.
I'm just adding it. There's more to call.
I love that. Yeah. This is why I love creatives. I love makers and I love writers. The ability to take a situation and then just like distill it into its essence like that. Yeah. Is gorgeous to me. I love it.
Me too. And although I am not a real fan of Twitter, mostly because it makes my brain hurt, like just scrolling through Twitter, the number of directions my brain goes in, it's challenging for me. But when I read well-written tweets that encapsulate an entire idea so succinctly and sometimes profoundly in this number of characters, then I'm like, wow, Twitter's good for that. And people are smart.
Yes. And I also saw this can happen in political cartoons and also just like pieces of art, pieces of graffiti, where people will encapsulate a whole idea in an image, which reminds me of Bonnie Siegler's work. Yep. That and the work that she collects and sort of like curates, where it all distills it down into a single image. It is magic to me. I love that.
So
I feel like
true.
Such a windbag, and I'm just like so moved by people who can do it efficiently, because I just have to take a long way to grandma's house.
But you get there. You get there.
Do I can't yet? Anyway, I'm so happy to be having this conversation with you.
Yeah, me too.
And it is a highlight of my life.
Me too.
Good meeting. Good episode.
Ditto.
Peace out, everybody.
Well done. Good
Is there
job.
anything else to say?
Just that I love you and I love doing this. I'm thankful for everyone listening right now. It's not cheeseball, but it's true.
I'd like to second that emotion. Love Laura Camion. Love doing this. Love everybody who's listening. And I think you're going first.
I am. I have dipped my fingers into my Spark file and grabbed a good one this week.
Oh,
so I will start by telling you.
When you said dip your fingers into your Spark file, I'm sorry. I just, having been raised Catholic and having attended so many masses in my life, that reminds me of when you walk into church. I don't know if you have had this experience, and you dip your fingers into the holy water and you bless yourself. Just to make sure you're not a vampire before you enter the church.
Oh,
that is what that reminded me of when you said that. I dip my fingers into my Spark file. I consecrate myself, and here we go.
It really, to me, that little story makes me feel like my Spark file is this sacred and blessed thing. And I thank you for that. I have a new perspective on my... And so it is. So I will start today by telling you or reminding you, because I think you probably know this, but one of my favorite Mary Oliver quotes is this: "It is a serious thing just to be alive on this fresh morning in this broken world."
Oh, I love that. That gave me a feeling when you said that.
I love it so much. And there have been times in my life when the world felt broken during times of loss or change or, heartbreaks, to 9/11, to my mom dying.
Yeah.
But certainly it is unlike what we've experienced, like this period of time where the world feels as broken as it feels now.
We're all in a storm. We may be in different boats, but everybody's in the storm.
That is correct. And it feels like, there's an intensity to this brokenness and an unknowing for like how long this might go on. But I think that's why I was reminded of Kintsugi recently. Are you familiar with Kintsugi, Suze?
I'm lightly familiar with it, and I learned about it from one of my awesome educators that I work with at the Metropolitan Opera. So
I'm going to fill you in a little bit. Yeah.
Fill me in a lot of bit.
Okay, a lot of bit. So Kintsugi is an ancient Japanese art form. It's actually a practice of mending and repairing something in a way that honors and highlights the breakage rather than treating it as something that needs to be disguised.
I feel like I'm going to cry during this, Spark. I just have
I might
feeling.
also.
Oh my God. That's a beautiful, beautiful idea.
It is. I just like conceptually, I just wrap my arms around this and embrace it wholeheartedly. Most likely, you've probably seen this art form demonstrated in pottery, like teacups or glass. They use like a precious metal, maybe liquid gold or silver. Sometimes it's a lacquer that has been dusted with powdered gold. And in the case of like a broken bowl, for example, they fill the cracks and put the pieces back together with the liquid gold holding it together like glue. But now the scar or the break is distinct and it's visible. It's highlighted.
It's like a vein of gold that runs through the bowl.
Yes, it's a beautiful streak of gold. And every single repaired piece of pottery is unique and original because they've not broken in the same exact way and they've not been repaired in the same exact way. So Kintsugi is part of the Zen ideals of wabi-sabi, which embrace and cherish things that are simple, unpretentious, and aged, in particular like rustic or weathered in quality. And I think about, I was saying to Wes, I'm like, you really, honestly, you can't go to like an estate sale or an antique store with me without like, I have to touch everything. I have to be like, I wonder what this lived through. I wonder who used this hairbrush. Oh, what stories does this tool have to tell? And he's like, yeah, that is exactly
he's
what
like,
it's
babe,
like.
You're going to want to wash your hands.
Yeah, now it's different, right? But I always feel, and I'm like that way with places as well, but I'm like, who has stood right here? Like the Tower of London. I'm like, who stood right here? who knew that those boys were were being brought up into the tower? Who knows what happened to them? What secrets were being told in this little bit? Like, I just love it so much. So I love that there actually is a container for this type of passion, this belief system that old and unpretentious and aged things are beautiful and valuable.
I think that I have accidentally smashed the ideas of wabi-sabi and could you say the other word?
Oh, Kintsugi?
Kintsugi together.
Yes.
I've smashed them together.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize that wabi-sabi, I always took that to mean imperfect, but you're saying it means simple things, aged things, and
unpretentious
aged.
things.
Yeah.
In particular, rustic or weathered. Yeah.
I feel like this is a good education for me. Well done, Cabs.
But I do think they're, it all, it can blend together because they're related ideas, and Kintsugi is part of those ideals. So you're not wrong in that. There's an old fable that I read about on thebookoflife.com, but it's a concept I think people have come across before. But this old fable is that one of the great proponents of wabi-sabi was a philosopher named Rikyū, and he lived in Japan in the 1500s. And the story goes, on a journey through the country, he was invited to dinner by a host who thought that he could be impressed by this elaborate and expensive antique jar that he bought from China. But throughout the visit, Rikyū didn't pay the jar any attention at all. And instead, he was preoccupied by admiring a branch swaying in the breeze. After he left, the host was so upset, he smashed the jar to pieces and went to bed in a little hissy fit. The other guests gathered the fragments of the jar and reassembled it using Kintsugi. Months later, when Rikyū visited again, he turned to the repaired jar with a knowing smile and declared, "Now it is magnificent."
Oh.
So that story's been handed down. Yes, it's been handed down throughout centuries to illustrate our preoccupation with beautiful, perfect things. And of course, is trying to teach the lesson that the repaired item is so much more interesting and lovely. And it also has a story to tell now too. So the Japanese word kintsugi comes from kin, which means golden, and sugi, which means repair. Golden
repair.
And yeah, now like whenever I catch myself in tears, like, and I'm usually aware, like, okay, I'm going through something. But now I'm going to think of myself as though like I'm in golden repair. Like I used to think of myself as a work in progress, but now I'm going to think I'm in golden repair.
I love that.
Yeah. So one of the principles at play in Kintsugi is, I think, the idea of resilience. And I really like the idea that experiences, the hardships and the healings that things or people have gone through are visible. I mean, although many times with people, they're invisible, but these experiences make us stronger. Certainly they make us unique and precious. But it's very much about making them visible and not hiding them. Have we talked about this? Like, did you have a phase when you wanted to hide anything that was like different about you?
Sure.
Just curious.
Yeah.
I think I've talked about it on the podcast before that, like I remember a time I was so obsessed with not being weird and I wanted to hide any differences.
Yep.
So desperately, like in science class, we were testing for our blood type. And I have a very visceral memory of being like, oh God, please don't let me have one of those weird blood types that hardly anyone else has.
Blood type. Yeah.
And I know for a fact I was not worried about it because medically I'd be, it would be hard to get an A or a B blood type for a transfusion or something. But I was actually worried that if we had to say our blood types out loud, it might like just make me show everyone like that I'm weird and different.
Yes.
And I have some difference inside of me. That's a really visceral memory, but really the difference I felt from other people growing up was my sensitivity. And I was just told my whole life, like, you're too sensitive. What's wrong with you? Because I think as a kid, I was super perceptive and I felt things maybe that weren't said, but I knew that they were true.
And then they just come out of your eyeballs.
And they came out of my eyeballs, yeah. But I learned really, really quickly, if I pointed those things out or showed them to others or tried to describe them, I would be shut down and told, to hide that instead, like that weird thing about you, try to fix that, try to make that better. Many, many, many years later, thanks to key people in my life, like an acting teacher who told me that like sensitivity was my superpower, and having a partner who's not afraid of my tears or my emotions. I, eventually started to let it all show. And what a freaking relief that I didn't have to keep it hidden anymore.
That's right. That's right.
And I think that accepting those things within you that you feel scared to let show is one of the human versions of Kintsugi. Like letting your flaws show, or your things that you perceive to be flaws, like letting them sparkle.
Oh, yes.
Like the gold veins in Kintsugi.
And to just like extrapolate from that, one of the things that we say so much when we teach people is whatever your Hellenbach is, that is your gift. Meaning whatever, like if you have been through a trauma and then you process the trauma or the flaming curveball or whatever it is, then that could work its way into your life's work. It's your vein of gold. And this is exactly what you're saying that I'm now repeating back to you.
I'm loving it.
It's so
because
beautiful.
There's so many connections. Like for me, like the writing this spark out was really simple because I'm like, it's all everything. It's everything that we talk about. Brene Brown said, I think we lose sight of the beauty. The most beautiful things I look back on in my life are coming out from underneath things I didn't know I could get out from underneath.
Yeah.
The moments I look back on in my life, I think those were the moments that made me, the moments of struggle. And I'm going to go a little deeper here, but in the spirit of surfacing vulnerabilities, I will admit that early in my life, I think I've mentioned this also, I'm a child of a narcissist, and I grew up trying to make everything perfect and do everything right, because as a child of a narcissist, you believe that if you do everything right, no one will get upset. No one will be mad at you. Your parents will be happy. Life will be fine. So I tried really, really hard to do everything right. And I was really good at a lot of things. But ironically, probably the thing that kept me from being even better at certain things was my worry about getting everything right.
Yes.
So,
what an enormous amount of capacity that must have taken. I don't know. Like when I hear that, I'm like, how were you not sleeping 12 hours a night? Like, how were you not just exhausted by that?
Oh, it was like an engine running, at all times. There was no letting that down. Because you just think about like tons of analogies and metaphors here, but a juggler with like 25 balls in the air, and you have to keep them all going.
Yeah.
But I remember also slowly over time reading about people who had led interesting lives like worth writing about. And these were like, historical people, but it could have been like women who had made different choices in their lives. Like I remember reading about Frida Kahlo and Gloria Steinem. Like maybe they didn't marry right away or ever. Maybe they chose not to have children. Maybe they were widowed or took many lovers of all genders. Maybe they wore pants before it was legal, or they traveled, or they simply like ate dinner alone in public places. And let me tell you, for a girl who was taught to do everything right, these stories were downright scandalous to me. And I freaking loved them. They were like my portal to another possible life.
Yeah.
I loved reading about the heartbreaks and the discoveries, the loves and the loss and the fantastic successes and the crushing failures, all of it. And somewhere along the way, I made a decision about my own life. And I determined, and I mean determined, that I wanted to live an interesting life too. A life,
Really? Like
fuck yes. Consciously.
Like at what age?
Like I fought for it. It was definitely in college because, I mean, as you know, I did things like I made choices and then I was like, I'm backing right out of this because this is a road to doing everything right. And this over here is a road to
Something
living the life
interesting.
I want to live. Yeah.
This is fascinating, Cami, and I've known you for a long time, and God knows we have clocked some hours talking, and I don't think I've ever heard you say this before.
Yeah,
that you made a conscious choice in around college age that you were like, I want to live an interesting life, a life worthy of being in a book.
Writing about, yeah. I mean, if you think about
that.
it, so as the people pleaser that I was, as a child, trying to make everything perfect, make everyone happy, everyone needed to like me. I needed to, like no one could have any problems with me or I would be like completely distraught that I hadn't, done everything right to please that person. And I remember the realization, it was probably like one of those sayings that,
well-behaved women seldom make history.
Well-behaved women seldom make history. And I realized, and it might have been my dad, honestly, but someone made me realize, like, guess what? If no one's talking bad about you, it's because they're not talking about you at all. They're not talking about you at all is because you're not doing anything of consequence, anything of interest at all. And, these were just little seeds that were planted, but somewhere along the way, all of those things added up to me that I was like, right. And it all goes back to like, when we talk about like, if you do anything, people will come for you. We talk about that all the time. Like,
if you try
used
anything,
to the idea.
People will come for you.
They will come for you.
Yeah.
And for me, that was like breaking down that barrier and saying like, okay, I am going to be okay with, if someone someone talks about me, I can't control what they're going to say. I can, do my best to live the life that I intend to live without harming any others. But I can't control, how someone else perceives that. And that was an enormous, and that wasn't in a lightning bolt moment. That was,
I love that.
I made that choice that, I wanted to live a life worth writing about or an interesting life.
I love that.
And this meant for me letting go of doing things perfectly right or doing things the way other people would do them. And this meant that my life might look different from the outside. And maybe you'd see the perceived mistakes or perceived failures right out in the open. And trust me, I've had people point them out, these failures and flaws, but I have learned to feel really proud of every one of them, to let them be seen and let them be honored because all of them make up an interesting life. So for me, Kintsugi, and here we are now in the midst of a pandemic, which I would say is interesting to say the least.
Mm-hmm.
In talking with my therapist the other day, she said that issues that exist prior to the pandemic are simply amplified by the pandemic.
Yeah.
And that made me start to wonder if this situation might just help us all admit to a few flaws, quote unquote, or embrace the scars. Like it just seems like because everyone has been hitting their own personal breaking point, emotionally, physically, financially.
Yeah.
For many people, it means like having no choice but to surface some of their feelings and articulate some of their vulnerabilities. And I think making them visible is such an incredible thing. Rather than discussing what's different or broken within us, there does seem to be more people like seeing the collective pain in each other and recognizing it. And maybe even if we don't feel yet like it's beautiful, at least we recognize it in ourselves.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And I'm just thinking about people who I wish for them. I wish for people, as everyone's feelings are being amplified and everybody's issues are being amplified by this. I hope that people have the support that they need, or get the support that they need to make, because what you're describing with Kintsugi and how it relates to the art and how it relates to, say, apply that metaphor to a human experience, is it requires time and care and some processing to get to the beautiful part.
Yes. And I would offer this, like like on a really, really deep, to like surface all of that. Yes. On a daily level, it could simply mean laughing at yourself, or, letting those dishes stand one more day without washing them. Like it doesn't have to be a character flaw. It can simply be something that you accept. And,
it doesn't everything doesn't have to be perfectly perfect all the time, whether that's to appease a narcissistic parent, or to please a house guest with your beautiful, expensive vase,
or to win at the pandemic, or to, feel like a victorious over this thing. Kintsugi is also called the art of broken pieces, or the art of embracing damage. And embracing damage felt so powerful to me. It's like that technique in therapy when you like visualize your inner child at an age when a trauma happened, or an age when a hurt happened, and it still resonates for you. And you simply imagine embracing the child and helping to like heal this old wound.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like I spend so much time, Cami, in your sparks, just being like, I love that. I love that. I love that.
I love that.
I wish somebody would just do a super cut of me telling you, I love that.
I love that. I love
but
that.
I do love that.
Thanks, Suze. The Kintsugi technique suggests that we shouldn't throw things away simply because they are broken. It can be remade into something just as useful, just as beautiful, if not more so. And it still feels right now to me like we're still in this moment where so many people are like in a hurry to fix the world, like put it back exactly the way that it was.
Oh boy.
But this has scarred us. There are changes in the composition of our world from this point forward.
1,000,000%. 1,000,000%.
There's changes in our collective world and in our individual lives. And I think there's value in looking at them and asking ourselves, is it possible to remake the world, or remake our individual worlds in a similar but more beautiful way?
But Cami, and that's awesome.
Can we have like veins of gold running through our lives that we will look back and say, and that is the scar from, the coronavirus, and we made it through and we built something more beautiful. So what can we make of it? I think we can look at what feels broken right now and just start by not trying to fix it right away. Spend some time embracing the damage, accepting and learning to love the scars. And when the time feels right, very gently, can we begin to fill the broken spaces with liquid gold, with love, with beauty, with joy, with laughter, with art. It is possible we might come out of this whole thing with a bigger understanding of our lives and what we want to get out of them, and a better understanding of and appreciation for our broken world. I'll just leave you. I will just leave you with these words from Alexandra.
Before I drop the mic, I'll leave you with these words.
I will leave you with the words of Alexandra Heather Foss, who wrote in an article on tinybuddha.com. I see beauty as the grace point between what hurts and what heals, between the shadow of tragedy and the light of joy. I find beauty in my scars.
Camion,
There
you
you go.
son of a bitch. I have a few while you were talking. I was just like scribbling notes. I love this. So the person that I was referring to who first told me about this concept of Kintsugi, which I think I had seen but didn't know the name of it, didn't know a lot about it, was one of the educators I work with at the Metropolitan Opera. And he was telling me how he has been trained in this mediation process where if there are two people or two groups of people, like there's a rift there.
Yeah.
There's a training process where you learn how to be with people and help them mediate through whatever the disruption is while you mend a bowl with Kintsugi.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Now, I hope I'm getting that right because I've only heard about that. Like I've never experienced it myself. So I'm a little bit like pulling this out of my ass, but I thought that was really, really cool. And when they told me about that, sorry, go ahead.
No. I was just going to say, had I like had access to that type of therapy when I was younger, that could be like life transforming because again, as a child of a narcissist, you really learn that like breaking something is like now you've ruined it forever. So a single fight with a friend or a boyfriend or whatnot, and now it's ruined. And I mean ruined because, this idea of perfection is so strong. And if you can get everything right, then everything will be okay.
Yeah.
So if I had learned earlier, like it really would have changed my life. I mean, I'm there now, but the idea that, you can have a fight and you can repair and it can be even more glorious and more beautiful than before. What a wonderful way to illustrate that as you're working through issues to then like even have this thing that you worked on together be like a physical manifestation of that process. How freaking awesome.
Yeah, I loved it. So I went home and I looked up how did you do Kintsugi because I have a few pieces that I've ordered, ceramic pieces and also a piece of glass that I ordered and they came in broken into big chunks, big pieces. Yeah. And I thought instead of just gluing these together or throwing them away, could I potentially do this Kintsugi technique that this teacher had been describing to me? And I didn't do it and I couldn't figure out how to do it. I know you can do it by mixing like gold colored sort of craft dust with glue.
Lacquer. Yeah, with lacquer.
Yeah, and lacquer. And I was like, I'd love to learn how to do it with real metals, but that's a whole other thing. But I'm totally fascinated by this. And the other thing that it brings to mind for me, talk about what do you make of it? Because of Now Hear This, because we've been doing so much work around this musical that is based on experiences from the lives of the original collaborators. I have had experience to go back into this material and things like the Golden Palace and things like there's a song on there called I Rarely Schedule Nothing. And it's all about me in high school just being so busy. And I'm the honor society president and the student council president and the head of the cheerleading squad and all of this stuff. And I fill up my time and I fill up my days and I rarely schedule nothing because if I had nothing to do, and the big scary secret is that I live in a hoarding house, and how shameful that was to me for so long. And then to take that and Kintsugi it and be like, we're going to make a story about this and we're going to make a musical number about this. And it's going to be like up tempo and dancing. And that, I think that's a Kintsugi too.
It is a Kintsugi. It's a vein of gold. Like the fact that you grow up in that house the way you did is a vein of gold. It's exactly what you said earlier. Like what we teach in our workshops, that all those things that we've been through are now such gifts.
Sparks. They're sparks.
They are sparks.
Camion, you're gorgeous. That was beautiful.
Oh, thanks. You're gorgeous too.
Should we take a little break?
Shall we?
Let's do it.
Okay.
Welcome back, everybody. Speaking of the Now Hear This, first, I want to shout out my people at the Orange County School of the Arts.
Yeah.
If you all heard my spark last week about their virtual spring musical, a production of our musical Now Hear This, then you know the backstory. But if you didn't listen to last week's podcast, the 30-second version is that we were all set to try out a new flexible version of our original musical Now Hear This at Orange County School of the Arts, aka OSHA, when the pandemic struck and all live theater got canceled and my trip to go work with them in rehearsals was canceled. But then we thought, what if this is the one spring musical that doesn't get canceled? What if the show went online? And that is exactly what the whole creative team and the students did. And the whole thing was recorded, lit, costumed, and filmed by these students and their families in quarantine. And it had its run May 14th through 17th on YouTube. And I just want to say, shout out all the love to all those people because it was glorious.
Oh,
I was so proud of them. Those performances, the creativity, all of it. They did their own like sort of golden carpet on Insta TV, like all of it. Their creativity around all of it was stunning. I loved it.
So
and
much.
The thing that moved me about these students and their teachers and the whole community actually was their resilience. Their resilience, speaking of Kintsugi, their resilience through creativity. I know that the idea of creativity, especially when we're all in survival mode, can seem unnecessary and even impossible. And when you're in legit fight or flight, that might be true. But when I think of our broader definition of creativity, applied imagination that fights for the powers of good, then creativity can be about problem solving or basic self-expression or finding a way to stay afloat and resilient in extremely challenging circumstances.
That's right.
Yeah. So that is my spark for this week, resilience through creativity.
Oh, I can't wait. I love this. I love it.
And
I love it.
I always feel the need to say, like, I think you made the point so beautifully in an earlier episode. This is not necessarily about pandemic productivity. This isn't about like doing the pandemic the best or any of that, or driving yourself if you're, to feel like you have to write King Lear from quarantine. This isn't about that. But it is about something. So let's unpack it. Sources for my spark come from an article on facinghistory.org, a fantastic study guide produced by the UN entitled The Last Flight of Peter Gens, vedemunderground.com, a YouTube video produced by Yad Vashem, and an article from the Holocaust Memorial Resource and an article from the Holocaust Memorial Resource and Education Center of Florida. Cams, Florida, I say.
Florida.
Yeah. So I've had this spark in my file since back when we were last at the Metropolitan Opera, and I did my spark about Brundabar, the children's opera that was staged in Theresienstadt.
Yes.
So in case you missed that episode or you blocked it out because it's a toughie, but it's a goodie, a little refresher on Theresienstadt. So Terezin was essentially an old fortress town near Prague, Czechoslovakia, with about a population during that time of about 7,000 people. And in June of 1940, the Nazis took control of Terezin. They expelled all of its non-Jewish residents. They renamed it Theresienstadt and began promoting it as a model Jewish settlement to the outside world, while in reality, it served as a transit camp for those being transported to Auschwitz and other concentration camps.
Suze, I remember that just making my blood boil the first time you told me that.
Yeah, it's a remarkable, horrible, amazing story and moment in history. So Theresienstadt was open for about 3.5 years, and nearly 140,000 Jews from all over Central Europe passed through on their way to other camps. And while Jews weren't gassed at Theresienstadt, more than 30,000 people died of disease and hunger. But despite overcrowding, food shortages, and forced labor, Theresienstadt's population of prominent Jewish artists and musicians and academics and creatives gave the ghetto this thriving cultural life. And you'll recall one of the articles I cited compared it to a Juilliard for Jews. There were classes and concerts and so many things going on in cellars and attics, and so much of it was in secret.
Yep.
In addition to all of the brilliant adults, 15,000 children passed through Theresienstadt. And some of those children were in the opera, Brundebar, which we talked about.
Yep.
And another boy who ended up there was called Peter Gins. Peter Gins was born in Prague in February 1928. His mother, Maria, had been raised in a Catholic family, and she and her husband, Otto, kept what was described as a liberal but traditional Jewish home. So they were parents to Peter and Peter's younger sister, Eva, who was 2 years younger than he was. As a kid, they had a happy early childhood in Prague, and their parents encouraged them in their education. So after elementary school, Peter's parents sent him to a special school for exceptional children. He had a vivid imagination, he had a creative mind, and this adventurous spirit, which he expressed in many different ways. His favorite studies were the sciences, but Peter loved to draw, and he always had a notebook with him and some pencils. And he was totally sparked by the writing of the 19th century French author and sci-fi pioneer Jules Verne. And of course, most of us know that Jules Verne was writing about air and space travel and undersea voyages before these types of adventures were a practical reality. And Peter was full on obsessed with it. So Jules Verne, for example, famously wrote a novel titled Around the World in 80 Days. And Peter, as a boy, wrote a novel entitled Around the World in 1 Second. By the time he was 14, Peter also had written several other sci-fi novels. He was just really clever. When German soldiers occupied Czechoslovakia in March 1939, they brought Nazi anti-Semitic laws and definitions with them. And when those anti-Jewish measures were implemented, Peter and Eva, his sister, were both classified as Mischlinge of the first degree. And that is to say, children of a mixed marriage in which 2 grandparents were Jewish. So they were classified in this way. By December of 1941, deportations from Prague to Theresienstadt ghetto had begun, and the Gins family was gradually broken up. Cams, when you see pictures of this family together, they look like, even in a still black and white photo, they look like they enjoy each other. It's one of the most interesting things I've seen. They really look like they enjoy each other. It's a weird thing to say, but they do. And we'll share a picture.
Amazing thing to capture in a photograph of that time. That's incredible.
1,000,000%. 1,000,000%.
Wow.
But then it's even more heartbreaking because then in 41, they started to slowly break this family apart. In October of 1942, at the age of 14, Peter learned that his name had been included on the transport list for Theresienstadt, and he had to leave that same evening. So,
what? Can you say that again? What?
I sure can. In October of 1942, he's working at a typewriter shop, this typewriter repair shop, and the manager of the shop told him the news that he had to leave. He was being transported to Theresienstadt, and he had to leave that night.
Oh, God.
Yeah. And we know about all of this because Peter wrote about it. So he left the shop. First, he told everybody goodbye because he didn't know when he would see them again. So he told all his coworkers goodbye. And then he walked home trying to absorb the sounds of his neighborhood because he had a suspicion he would not hear those sounds again for a long time. He was instructed to select things he wanted to bring with him, and this is what he chose: paper, linoleum, and small knives for cutting the linoleum, and his unfinished novel, The Wizard of Alte Mountains, and a few watercolor paints.
Oh my God.
These were his most valued possessions. Peter described in his writings his goodbye with his father, who kissed him several times, and his aunt, who gave him one last kiss. and then he was transported to Theresienstadt.
Oh my
And
God.
when he got there, the children lived in these group quarters separate from the adults. And Petter and about 100 other boys lived in something called Home Number 1 of Barrack L417. And while they were living there, these boys were secretly educated by adults in an effort to make their lives a bit more normal. Which that was the opera Brundabar grew out of that too. That was a way for them to provide some normalcy for these young people in these extreme circumstances. Under the guidance of their teacher, Walter Eisinger, who was a communist who preached free thought, Petter and these boys created a system of self-government in order to organize their own lives.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So they're in this barracks with like 100 boys. And if you can picture it, it's sort of like a big open room, and their bunk beds are sort of stacked 3 high, like floor level, and then another one, and then another one. And they gave themselves, they created this system of self-government. And this group of boys kind of became this warm, supportive new family for each other. In his writing, Petter said, yeah, I know.
Sorry,
I know.
I'm just like, of course, that's how you get through. You get through it like together.
Yeah, you get through it together. That's right. In his writing, Petter said, we no longer wanted to be an accidental group of boys passively succumbing to the fate metered out to us. And boy, did they make good on that idea. From July 1942 to September 1944, these young boys founded and produced their own newspaper, a weekly underground zine called Vedem, which in Czech means in the lead, or we are the leaders. Yes. Yes, girl.
Oh my
yes.
God. I'm celebrating them. That's amazing.
Get ready, because there's a lot to celebrate.
Oh God.
Petter, as the editor of Vedem, was the leader of these young leaders.
Go
and
Petter.
He was, that's right, a frequent contributor to the magazine that they all created. Remember, 14 years old. 14 years old. Yep.
In like separated from your family.
Yep.
Oh God. Okay.
Yep.
All right.
So he oversaw the newsroom. He urged contributors to write about what they thought and what they saw and what they did. So if a boy had a job, this is like forced labor. And if a boy had a job hauling dead bodies to the crematorium, Petter would encourage that boy to write about it. He commissioned articles for the magazine. He paid his writers with food that his family sent him in care packages. He hounded his contributors, aka his fellow bunkmates, to have their submissions in on time. Talk about an accountability partner.
My God.
And if there were not enough articles, then Petter wrote them under a pseudonym. So if they needed more content, he would write more, and he would do it under a pseudonym.
Oh my
He had
God.
his own column called Ghetto Rambles, where he visited different parts of Theresienstadt, such as the bakeries and the morgue, and he interviewed people there, and he wrote about them.
Oh my God.
How about it, school newspaper? So in their shared room, the boys wrote at the center on this wooden table or up on their bunks, and bunkmates were kept on lookout to give a secret signal if a German guard was nearby. But the boys, even with those restrictions, the boys made every effort to create a real magazine, even jokingly adding a price on the cover. Vedem published opinion pieces, artwork, poems, reflections about the past and the future, jokes, comics, essays, puzzles, cynical observations, drawings and illustrations, and the quote of the week.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. So these pieces that they created described life in Theresienstadt and often recalled the boys' prior lives in their hometowns. Some poems were about specific events that the boys witnessed, like people dying, families being separated, while others expressed the boys' fears and outrage, hopes and dreams. And the work ranged from silly and playful to mournful and tragic to hopeful, just the full spectrum of what their experience was. Because it wasn't always, there was clearly extreme challenge. But it wasn't, there were also, I was reading this one piece that was like, there were also flowers blooming, and there were also, there was laughter, and there was music. So the wide variety of their work represents the wide spectrum of experiences they were having at this time. To me, it seems like they were using their creativity as a way of coping with their reality and giving themselves giving themselves a voice and ordering their thoughts and finding meaning in their experiences.
That's right.
Also, Petter's imagination and creativity became a means of resistance for him and for the other boys.
Yeah.
Through Vedem's stories and illustrations, Petter conveyed his determination to maintain his free will and independence by not surrendering to the Nazis. This is beautifully represented on this one cover that was drawn by Petter, that it's a cannon, but it's not made out of metal. It's made of a rolled up copy of Vedem.
Oh.
And this cannon is like blasting into, the opponent.
Yep.
And there's a pile of cannonballs piled up next to it, and each has a different label in Czech, but the translation is humor, laughter, satire.
Yes.
So they were using their humor, laughter, and satire to just like lob a cannonball at their foes, essentially.
To cope. I mean, it's coping at its best.
Yeah.
We talk a lot about being onto something and to wake up with purpose.
Yes.
And I would imagine that being in those conditions or any really traumatizing position, the idea of being onto something or knowing what your purpose is when you wake up in the morning is a crucial element to coping, to getting through it, like setting your eyes on something and marching toward it.
%. What those boys were creating with Vedem was such an act of defiance, and it was a dangerous one.
Mm-hmm.
The writers, 40 Jewish boys between the ages of 13 and 15, braved hunger, exhaustion, forced labor, and homesickness. And they would regularly risk, on top of all that, they would regularly risk their lives by sneaking into forbidden places in the ghetto in order to write their articles.
Wow.
Because the potential. Sorry, go ahead.
Did you say all of it's written under pseudonym, right? I mean, they couldn't possibly.
I'm going to tell you more about that.
Oh, my goodness. Sorry.
You're asking all the right questions, young journalist.
I'm so with you.
You're right on track. So because of the potential for being killed for their contributions to Vedem, the magazine's writers and editors assumed nicknames.
Aha.
In order to conceal their identities. In case the magazine was ever found, their captors wouldn't be able to pinpoint the exact creators. Wow. So here are some of the nicknames: Beanie, Cement, Salami, Flash, Trixie, Baron Munchausen, and Cold-Blooded Horse.
Awesome.
And Petter, I believe, went by NZ, which is Pettergins. It's the last piece of his name.
I love it.
Yeah. Isn't that badass? That's a good tag. The most prolific contributors eventually referred to themselves as the Academy, which I love. I love. The Academy is a great name for anything: a dance crew, a band, an album. It's just a fantastic name.
So
a group of boys who write an underground zine. About 100 boys passed through home number 1 between 1942 and 1944, and many of them are only known by their nicknames.
Oh.
Yeah. And speaking of, Vedem's early artwork reflected things that a typical 1940s Central European teenage boy would draw, including depictions of ships and pets and families. But their artwork evolved to reflect what they were experiencing at Theresienstadt, the harsh realities, and specifically subjects such as a family boarding a ghetto-bound train, or an old person suffering from illness, and a guard holding a gun. And while much of the work was created by Petter, the identity of many of the illustrators remains a mystery because much of their work was unsigned perhaps to maintain their deniability in case it was ever found. So on one hand, I'm like, yes, boys, good work on staying safe.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, it's such a loss to not be able to celebrate who created that beautiful writing and artwork.
Yeah.
The production of Vedem was a near miracle because of the limited resources. Issues were printed with a typewriter found in the former school's offices, while paper and supplies were smuggled into the bunk room from little offices in the ghetto.
This is crazy because how do you type quietly? You can't.
How
those
do you
old
type
typewriters
quietly?
You're calling attention to yourself with every keystroke.
It's absolutely true. It's absolutely true. But I also think of the concerts that they would have in secret at Theresienstadt, in cellars and in attics. And I'm just like, ooh, how the hell do you just pile blankets around the person who is playing their violin or the typist to muffle the sound? Yeah. That might have also been why I'm just speculating here, but it might have been why they snuck into like empty spaces and offices to write and work on stuff. And they imperiled themselves by doing so, because had they been caught, they would have been killed, actually. So,
oh my gosh.
Yeah. So the stakes are pretty high. The boys transcribed articles written on paper scraps into elegant copy for the magazine's pages. So they would take these little scraps of writing, and then they would like sort of like typeset it or paste it into the magazine. And listen to this. So they had found this old typewriter in one of the abandoned offices, and the ribbon ran out after Vedem's 30th issue. So the boys wrote the remaining 53 issues of the magazine by hand.
Every copy of the issue was by hand?
Well, listen to this, Camion. with the limited supplies and writing like this at all was completely forbidden.
Yeah.
And because of that, just one copy of Vedem was produced each week, and it was quote unquote circulated via an intimate spoken word reading each Friday night in their bunkhouse. One boy stood guard during the reading and gave a secret signal if a German guard was approaching. Vedem's weekly readings amongst its writers and editors provided a rare forum for personal victory, truth, camaraderie, and self-esteem, and eventually attracted some of Theresienstadt's cultural and academic elite who were drawn to the expressions of spirit, truth, and solidarity that these teenage boys were espousing. Isn't that the shit? They had every Friday night, they came together and they read and celebrated what they had created during the previous week. And then the adults started showing up because they were like, yes, young freedom fighters. Yes. I love it.
God. I'm not really holding it together very well.
That's okay. Let it go, broadcast news. Let it go.
Okay.
In this excellent YouTube video posted by Yad Vashem, the narrator says, through Vedem and laughter and writing and comradeship and free will and thought, these young creators found meaning and maybe even hope in a world of chaos and uncertainty. Which I love, because we live in a world of chaos and uncertainty.
Yes,
but you know, there are people that have gone before us, and they have showed a potential template for a potential possibility for how to be.
That's right.
However, as Petter approached the age 16, the age he would be considered an adult, he grew thinner and he grew more concerned.
No.
I'm sorry, Camion. And indeed, on 28th of September, 1944, at the age of 16, Petter Gins was transported to Auschwitz, where he was murdered in the gas chamber. Before he left for Auschwitz, he gave his diary to his sister Eva. In addition to all of his other creativity, Petter had also kept a diary every day.
Oh my gosh.
And he was able to give it to his sister before he was transported. Eva lived to see the camp's liberation and was reunited with her parents in Prague after Theresienstadt ghetto was liberated by the Soviet forces on May 8th, 1945. So his family, with the exception of Petter, they survived.
That's
which
amazing.
is unbelievable.
And his diary survived with her in theory. Oh,
His
God.
diary has been published under the title The Diary of Petter Gins, and in it he says, "The seed of a creative idea does not die in mud and scum. Even there, it will germinate and spread its blossom like a star shining in the darkness." Isn't that gorgeous?
Yeah.
Are you done?
I'm done. Yeah.
Here's something beautiful. Maybe this will help. Maybe this will dry your tears.
Okay.
After the war, there was only one boy from the group who remained in Terezin. He made it through the whole war. And that boy's name was Zdenek Tausig. He collected every copy of Vedem, put them in a cardboard box, and buried them in the blacksmith shop where his father worked in Theresienstadt. He said he didn't expect that they would survive, but they did. And when Terezin was liberated, Zdenek unearthed the box and took them with him to Prague. And the complete surviving collection of Vedem, consisting of 83 issues, 800 original pages, is now housed in the Terezin Memorial.
Unbelievable.
It all survived. It all survived thanks to this boy, Zdenek Tausig.
These guys knew how to make it happen and were resourceful and creative in making sure that it survived too.
Yeah. The remarkable thing about this material and the fact that it survives is all of this contained within Vedem provides us with this straight up view into the lives of these boys. And it shows us their creativity and their resiliency, even under horrific conditions.
That's right.
And if not for Vedem and not for the work of Petter Gins and all of these contributors, these experiences that these boys were living wouldn't have been recorded so thoroughly and probably would have been forgotten or never come to light at all. So in addition to everything else they were accomplishing, they were creating a record. And to your point, Camian, a legacy.
Yeah.
One of the boys who survived and grew to adulthood said, "The magazine shows the world that we did fight back."
Oh my God.
That gets me.
Their creativity. Yeah.
With their creativity. Petter's powerful imagination continued working until he took his final steps at Auschwitz, as evidenced in his artwork and his writing. In the film The Last Flight of Petter Gins, they explained how strong Petter's creativity was, even despite the difficulties he encountered every day living in the ghetto away from his family. The documentary says, "Making art is embedded in someone to such an extent that even life, such as it was in Terezin, for many artists, and for Petter for sure, did not cut the urge to make art." Petter's imagination also enabled him to go to places and see things in his mind's eye that others had not. For example, Petter drew this piece called Moon Landscape. He drew this in Terezin before anyone had traveled to the moon. There were no photographs taken by astronauts picturing the surface of the moon yet. And he drew this piece. It looks like it's pencil on paper, and it's looking across the landscape of the moon as he imagined it. And in the distance, you can see Earth, like out in the distance. So even while he was incarcerated in a place where so much was taken from him, Petter was dreaming about outer space and science fiction. And I really feel like this demonstrates that no one can ever take away a person's imagination and creativity.
No, it's your mind. That's what you have. Even
that's
you can
right.
imprison you physically, but not mentally.
Yeah. So what do we make of it? So some things have already been made of it. As I mentioned, an animated documentary called The Last Flight of Petter Gins. It was directed by Sandra Dixon, and it takes his drawings and illustrations and it animates them. And it also, there's narration that are his writings being read. So you get to hear his words. There's a museum exhibit. Since 2016, the Vedem Foundation has produced, operated, and promoted a traveling museum collection titled Vedem Underground, where you can see the work of Peter Ginz and these young creative activists. And what do you make of it? I say your own zine, perhaps chronicling the times that we're living in now.
My God, yeah.
If you're a teacher, I know that a lot of teachers and parents are really struggling right now. But I just want to say, take a page from the book of these teachers who were creating normalcy for these young people during the Holocaust in camps, using anything at their disposal. So if you can take a scrap of inspiration from that.
My God. Yeah. And no,
Yeah.
like not just creating normalcy for them, but also literally teaching them how their imagination and their minds can free them from, whatever physical constraints we're feeling at the moment.
Yeah, exactly. Petter's sister, formerly Eva Gens, she must have married and changed her name to Hava Pressburger. She made something beautiful. She partnered with the UN to create a beautiful study guide to accompany the documentary The Last Flight of Peter Ginz, and in it she says these words. Petter's many books and illustrations show the depth of his talent and desire to learn. While Petter did not return to us, he did make a valuable contribution to the world through his art and writings. It took incredible courage to speak his mind in Vedem, when surely he risked death if discovered. I am proud that Petter's legacy lives on, and I hope that you will be inspired by Petter to help make this a better world for all. I love that. And I also want to add this. Cams, you've alluded to this, but I just want to say this. Not to be morbid, but if you've listened to earlier podcast episodes of the Spark File, you know we're all going to die. And whether that's in a year or 2 years or 20 or 50 or 70 years, you heard it here first, we're all going to die. And in our remaining time, there are going to be good times and there's going to be extremely challenging times.
Yeah.
Peter Ginz and the boys that he lived with and led didn't know how much time they had. And their living conditions, to your point, Camian, their living conditions were awful. Rats and bed bugs and overcrowding and forced labor,
starvation,
and death and starvation all around them. It was awful, but they chose how they were going to live.
Yeah.
And they lived like they were going to survive. They didn't just lay down and sink into their circumstances and fixate on the extreme negatives in their present moment and in their potential futures. They organized themselves. They gave their lives order and purpose and meaning, and they gave themselves something that they could control.
Mm-hmm.
They insisted upon creativity and self-expression. And as a result, imagine, Camian, imagine, listeners, how much different life in that bunkhouse was than in other places that didn't have someone like Peter Ginz leading the way.
Yeah.
It's the point you just made, Camian. If you know when your feet hit the floor in the morning that you have something that's pulling you forward, something that you've put into place, you're going to live your day differently.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. With intention and purpose and, a deliberate moving forward because you know where you're going.
Absolutely.
When
With
there's a
purpose
million
and
unknowns
meaning
around you. Yeah.
and accountability
Yeah.
and support. Absolutely.
Just 1 week at a time. All I know right now is that we are going to publish this zine this week. That's all we know. We don't know.
I'll tell you, Camian,
what else.
there have been, let's have some real talk. There have been times when us making this podcast, this has been the lifeline for me. This is the lifeline.
100%.
Knowing that we have the responsibility of making this and writing our sparks and meeting each other when we say we're going to meet each other and getting this out. I'm telling you, there have been times when this has been my lifeline.
Suze, now you're going to make me cry some more, but I'm 100% with you. And what it means is, on a daily level, we're practicing what we preach, which is eyes open, ears open for that spark, for that little thread that that thing that we know, we're searching for, that's going to become the spark that we talk about this week on the Spark File.
1,000,000%. Yes.
And it's a practice that we chose, that we want to be in on a daily basis anyway. We want to be of the mindset that we are looking and learning all the time. And that alone is purposeful. It's a gift that we then get to craft those ideas into sparks for the podcast.
When we started consciously ordering our lives around that, because we had a deliverable connected to it, it changed the way my brain worked.
100%.
I always have my eyes open for the spark, the spark, the spark, the spark, the spark. And it's a positive thing. It doesn't feel neurotic and it doesn't feel manic. It just feels like a practice. And it feels like you have to be in the present moment and you have to be paying attention. And I think those are good things.
Me too. And it's brought more joy and more wonder to me, to stop and look at something and think about it in ways that, like, maybe previously I might have walked right on by and thought, oh, that's pretty, that's neat, and keep going. And now I give, it further contemplation, which is awesome.
I love it. It makes me think about those. I know that it's different circumstances, but this isn't a Holocaust, but it is a pandemic.
That's right.
Many of us, if you're making this podcast or listening to it, we have many more liberties and privileges than people who went through, and some people who were lost in that Holocaust.
That's right.
But I don't want to make an uneven comparison, but I do think of those students and teachers at OSHA who just produced that full-length musical, totally separated from each other in pandemic quarantine, and how they put their experiences of their lives and their lives during the pandemic specifically into the work, and how, even though they were physically separated, it connected them. And the whole thing became like a love letter to each other.
Honestly.
And they have said they feel a sense of completion and pride, like they crossed a finish line under seemingly impossible circumstances. So it makes me think of it because they're I believe the children are our future.
Oh my God, yes. And they could have said collectively, like, it's too hard. Yeah. It's too hard.
Yeah.
But they didn't.
They sure could have.
You know what I mean? And I don't mean to say like we all have to produce a full length musical, but I think we just need to keep asking ourselves, what can I do? Can I keep a diary? If I can't commit to pages, can I do one of those like 1 line a day diaries? Like, what am I capable of doing, and commit to it?
Yeah. So Cam and I love, we quote this quote 15 times every episode of the podcast, but we love that Walker Percy quote, not to be onto something is to be in despair. And the people that I observe thriving during these times, it's typically because they are onto something. And the people I see struggling and despairing, much of the time, again, to your point, Camian, it's because they are not onto something. Yeah. So I just want us to ask ourselves, and listener, if you care to, I want you to ask yourself whether you get to live another year or 2 or 20 or 50 or 70. How do you want to live this life? How do you want to live your days? How do you want to conduct yourself? And with your remaining precious, brief, fleeting time on this planet, what do you want to make of it? And that is my spark for today. Pettergins and the boys who made Vedem, thank you so much.
Oh, I honor them so completely. I'm honestly drenched in tears. Oh. What a beautiful, beautiful spark, Suze. And I'm so happy that their work lives on and that their story lives on.
Isn't that amazing? I'm just like, that it didn't get eaten by rats, that it didn't mold, that they never got caught.
Amazing.
That it didn't get burned. Like the boys freaked out, and they're like that. Yeah. No one of those 40 or 100 boys was like, you're going to get us all in trouble, and burn the damn thing. Like that every issue, every issue remains.
That's just phenomenal.
So
It's so
to
phenomenal.
Petter and to Trixie
Oh,
and to Cold-Blooded Horse and to Baron von Munchausen
ins.
and I'm so thankful for the legacy of Sparks that they leave behind.
Me too.
Yeah.
For their laughter and satire. And what was the other?
I think it's like humor, satire. I forget the third one, but
I love
come
it.
on.
I love
It's
it.
beautiful.
Oh, Suze, that was so good.
Likewise,
so good.
Cami. You know I love you. You know I love making this podcast with you.
I love you so
I always
much.
feel it's so funny. This podcast is like such good medicine. And whenever we finish recording, I always feel better.
Oh,
I feel
totally
better.
like on a high. Yeah.
It gives me a speech
afterwards.
impediment, but I do feel better.
Aw.
I guess that's it. We hope this put another bunch of sparks in your file. Hey, if there's a spark you'd like us to explore, or if you've taken a spark and fanned it into a creative flame and you'd like to share it, or if you have a question for us.
Hey.
Yeah.
Why not?
Need a little advice? Dear Alex and Annie, I'm depressed. Dear Alex and Annie, what am I supposed to do? Do you remember that from Saturday morning?
I do not. No.
Oh, it was a thing. It was like sort of I'm sure it was all like cooked up, but it was like
those
like
letters
on
aren't
television. On television, it was Alex and Annie, and you could supposedly write to them and ask them for advice, and they would give you good, wholesome advice. Anyway, but we're not going to give you good, wholesome advice like Alex and Annie. But you can email us at thesparkfile@gmail.com, and we'll give you the raw, real lowdown,
real deal.
Or you can submit through our website, which is even better, thesparkfile.com.
We will even happily take your feedback, but you know the price of admission. First, you have to share a creative risk that you have taken recently.
Ooh, and if you want to, you should follow us on social media at The Spark File, and be sure to subscribe to this podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And if you want, you could subscribe, rate, and 5-star review it. If you like this podcast, we hope that you'll share it with people that you love. And if you didn't like it, you should know we're doing our best and serving at our highest level during this time. And if that's not working for you, we wish you the best, and we wish you would go elsewhere.
If something tickles your fancy. I was going to comment on that. I was like, no, I'm going to go on. If something tickles your fancy and gets your creative juices flowing, we are writing you a forever permission slip to make that thing that's been knocking at your door. It is your turn to take a spark and fan it into a flame.
You got to typeset it. You got to guitar fret it. You got to do the thing or make the thing, then let go and forget it.
Oh, you got to take it and make it.
When I bump into something that inspires me, I dump it in my spark file. Could be something that I want to make or how I want to be. I pump it in my spark file. I jump into my spark file. Let's open up the spark file.
Hi, friends. Susan Blackwell from the Spark File here to let you know that the doors are open for the Spark File Illume, a 9-month group creativity coaching mastermind that invites you to be the chief creative officer and chief marketing officer of your creativity. But what does that mean? That means in 9 months in Illume, you will clarify and advance your big creative goals and learn how to effectively share your work with the world. Now, if you're listening to this and you're an experienced creative or an accomplished professional who seeks a space where it is safe to attempt something you've never tried before, or complete a big creative project, or take your work to the next level and acquire the skills needed to share your creative work with the world, Illume might be right for you. We are calling in emotionally intelligent, high-functioning creatives who are ready to level up. You can find out more by going to thesparkfile.com/Illume, but do it now to find out if Illume is right for you and to save with early bird discounts. That's thesparkfile.com/Illume. Take a leap, take a risk. Go to thesparkfile.com/Illume and join us for Illume.